every developer now is going to change the way that they work because of AI. And I don't know that anyone is actually starting talking about that. So I'll be curious to see if that's one of the things that Apple might address during the WWDC.
Hello, everybody. This was the crazy week in tech, especially for those of us who are industry analysts and get asked to go to every event under the sun, even though we can't do that. We had members of our team everywhere. So, team, say hello and where you were this week.
Hello, I'm Carolina Milanesi, and this week I had the pleasure to hang out with Austin and Max in Seattle for Sunday and Monday, and then we all we flew off, and I went to Dell in Vegas.
I am Max Weinbach. I was at Build with, again, Austin and Carolina, and then went to Mountain View for Google I/O.
Hey everyone, I'm Austin Lyons, and I was in Seattle at Build.
And I
Where
am
did you go,
Ben
Ben?
Bajarin. I was at Dell in Vegas for a day trip, which was fun. Being on the West Coast made it easy to fly to Dell for the day, and then I came back. I was missing out on the team picture. So for everyone knows, since Austin joins, we have yet to all be in the same place at the same time. The three of them was the closest we've got, and I should have photoshopped myself in. I was left out of the equation. And Max and I were together on Tuesday for Google, which was an enjoyable Google. So the theme, obviously, I mean, I don't know when we're going to have an event week or whatnot where the theme is not AI. It appears AI is the center of the industry conversation. It was a theme that was at every event, and interestingly, all three companies that we were at, including a host of things that happened at Computex this week, were again doubling down on the theme of AI. So we thought we would unpack what that means, what we learned from each event, each vendor, their thoughts for AI, and kind of what that looks like from an industry standpoint going forward. So Carolina can lob off the overarching thematic viewpoint, I guess, from you saw obviously all the events and you covered Google. So I'm just having you start with the theme.
I think what was interesting, if you kind of step back from the individual announcements, is why we're talking about AI, you start to see that companies are getting at it in a different way. And as is often the case, they're doing from their core, right? So what brings most money to the company? And what was interesting was to see, if you're thinking about Microsoft, it was all about the ecosystem, and it was a developer conference, the same as for Google. And so how do you take advantage of AI if you're a developer, if you are a data scientist, and creating the infrastructure for those connections to happen with agentic AI and agents always as the core of what they're doing. I went to Dell, and it was about infrastructure, but in a different way. It's really actually talking about on-premise, creating the infrastructure for enterprises to take advantage of AI in a secure and private way, and maybe a more cautious approach to agents. And I thought that the CTO had a great point about thinking about agents, not just as Microsoft is trying to position them so digital talent, but really more about the job to be done and the task. And with that, thinking about how you did with software, even developer inside or outsourcing, and the implications that outsourcing brings to your data and your IP. And I thought that was the first time I actually heard somebody talk about the implications that AI might bring more from that perspective. And obviously for Dell, on-prem is the big theme around AI. So that was interesting. And the two, and then taking Google, made me also think about how right now we continue to talk about enterprise, but Google, obviously B2C, came at it from a consumer perspective. And we need to do that. Even even brands that are focused on businesses need to start thinking about the fact that if consumers don't buy into AI, even B2B is not going to be successful, right? Because you need that human buy-in, whether I am a customer at a bank or, somebody shopping online or whatever. You have to convince consumers that AI is there to their advantage.
Yeah, I think the and all of this is a contrasting technological viewpoint and business model viewpoint, which I think is
Absolutely.
interesting. I think just in some of the conversations we've all had together, either over text or whatever, I think the clarity of, your business model is showing and it's evident in your strategy, regardless of whether you're intending that or not. And oftentimes that means, well, maybe there's a deficiency in your strategy because of that, because you're committed to that business model. And or is there a technology approach, right, that gets exposed where, yeah, you have a defendable advantage, but you also have an opening that, somebody else can come over. And this is the straddling of enterprise and consumer that you see so glaringly, where Microsoft is really talking to enterprises, Google is talking to consumers. They all would love to mix and cross those boundaries, but they're all having some struggles. So that theme, I think, remains largely untouched. So from a technical standpoint, I think Max and Austin's lenses were, in the weeds of some of the in techies, both in models and also there was conversations around infrastructure. So, whichever of you wants to start, feel free. But let's, from a tech standpoint, what were some of the takeaways?
Max, you want to go first?
Oh,
Too kind. Okay, I'll jump in. I think at Build, I saw lots of interesting demos around agents from Microsoft, and of course the audience was developers. But interestingly, I think these demos tried to show the power of Microsoft making it easy to automate tasks. Like that's what these agents really were, was just for example, they had Satya, shipping code. And really, he was just like taking a pull request on GitHub and assigning it to Copilot, and Copilot would run off and do it in the cloud. And I thought it was really interesting how they made it easy for anyone to sort of automate tasks. And in that sense, you could become a developer. Now, what did it take to become a developer? Well, you had to write essentially like product requirements really articulately so that Copilot could pick it up and ship it. Of course, interestingly, with AI, you can now write product requirements really easily. And they even had examples where someone had, mocked up a wireframe very easily with AI. And so different conversation, but all of these interesting questions started coming up as we were chatting with other analysts around like, what is the future of work when we're seeing someone who maybe was a developer can now start to like wireframe and write product requirements and sort of end-to-end solve problems. But from a technical perspective, Microsoft made it all possible in their environment. And then of course, like had nice, simple UIs where it was easy to point and click and write using natural language to essentially tell the machine how to solve this problem for me.
and I think one of the interesting ones from Google, especially from an infrastructure, because they have that full vertical integration, they were able to do, what was it, 480 trillion tokens last month in terms of generation, and seem to just be handing out what are normally really expensive models for free to everyone, and then just adding AI everywhere into all of their products for both enterprise and consumer. And then testing out interesting things. The cool demo was Project Astra, which is their test bed for new Gemini features, where it can now highlight things on your screen, control a Pixel phone, go make phone calls for you, and all of this stuff into a universal agent. And I don't know if anyone else has the actual compute infrastructure to host inference at scale to do that outside of Google, just because of that
Mm.
full vertical stack.
Yeah, and I think you're
Go.
I'm just saying, I think we're picking up on the theme that that Carolina hit up on the beginning, which
Excuse
is
me?
just how does agents play into this conversation, because everybody talked about them. Everybody's philosophy for agents is vastly different, but it's all coming back to, like, before it was, we're just going to use AI and it's going to maybe write me some stuff, and now we're saying AI is going to go and like do things for me, which I think is consistent with I don't love this analogy that Jensen uses, but he's always like, if you just had like a little ghost agent on your shoulder, like guiding you and telling you and doing things for you, like, so it's a fairy agent, but it's taking care of X, Y, and Z. Everybody gets an agent is essentially like, or many agents is kind of the discussion that we're in, but I don't know we've like really wrestled with the implications of that from a user experience standpoint, and how you manage these. Like, it raises more questions, I think, still.
What I was gonna say, other than repeating my name, so that Ben
I didn't say it.
remembers
I
it.
didn't say it.
So close. Was on the back of what Austin was saying about, everybody can be a developer. There's the other side of that is every developer now is going to change the way that they work because of AI. And I don't know that anyone has actually started talking about that. So I'll be curious to see if that's one of the things that Apple might address during the WWDC. Because while we get fixated on certain things that are, DLXs and series of the world, AI showcases different things. Like, it shows up in what we do in different way. And I think that from a developer perspective, Microsoft has the opportunity to do what we're doing for knowledge workers with the word trend index of actually showing people what the world is going to look like from a workflow perspective once AI and agents come into play. Because otherwise, to your point, Ben, we're going to continue to be limited as to how we think AI can help us. We are just going to do things faster, maybe a little bit better, but we're limiting the ultimate opportunity that AI brings just because of our limited thinking, which is built on muscle memory of how things have been done up until now.
That actually is another interesting point. Part of one of Microsoft's big announcements was open sourcing Copilot agent inside of VS Code. And that's interesting because Cursor, Windsurf, all of these competitors based on VS Code are worth what now? It's 3 billion for Windsurf, 9 billion for Cursor. And it changed the way developers work in a lot of cases, because you can now have one person do a job of 10 and start from scratch in a normal workflow and environment. VS Code is insanely popular, and just augment everything they're doing with AI. Microsoft is powering most of it with their open source projects. And it just becomes, you can have one person become 10.
Yeah, Carolina, as to what you're saying about just like, how do we make sure we're not limiting what we can do and having an open mind with AI? One of the things that I was thinking about while I was at Build and just watching these demos is a lot of what they would showcase are the things that people know they ought to do, but don't have, it never becomes a priority. So for example, the developer one that everyone resonates with is tech debt. It's like, yeah, I know we need to refactor that thing over there, but it's not urgent. And so I never get to it. So I walked away thinking, like, if it was my job to be like an agent evangelist, I would talk to people about, like, what's your task list, and on your sort of quadrant of like important to not important and like not urgent to urgent, what are those things that you have to keep spending time on because they're urgent, but they're actually not important? and let's try to use software, AI software, to essentially automate that. And of course, you could say, well, hey, haven't people been able to automate things with software for a long time? And totally you can, but of course with generative AI now, it's becoming easier to just use natural language to try to do
and
that.
faster.
Exactly. And so I think it can, from the business model perspective, Microsoft can turn more people into developers, but it's almost like low code, no code, totally.
Well, and there's an interesting sort of dynamic about this because, I think a conversation we'll continue to have for at least the next couple of years is, cloud versus on device. And it was interesting because I actually really liked, to Carolina's point, right? Dell is like on-prem, like we're going to bring you all this new infrastructure to sit inside your four walls. But their overarching philosophy is that you should bring AI to your data, not your
Correct.
data to AI. And in order to do that, you've got to have local infrastructure that supports that. And I actually just really thought that was a compelling, viewpoint, because it does make sense, right? If I'm a corporation, if I can build this sort of new infrastructure that leverages AI, and then my data, wherever it's captured at the edge, and both Michael Dell in his keynote and Jensen at Computex mentioned now that when you bring this level of local compute, you can actually add unstructured data to this. So it's not just send it a file. It's like it'll go find all your unstructured files, your data, and use that because it's got compute to do so. That opens up, the wide world of data that you have access to bring that back into a meaningful way, to organize it, to make it actionable. And I was thinking about it because like that's not something an organization can actually do in the cloud. Like it'd be very hard to just throw the weight of your company's data up into the cloud and say, organize it, structure it, build me software to help me manage it. So I actually think it was a very strong case for, in this case, right, an organization's needs, which right, to you both, Austin and Caroline brought this up as agents, right? Microsoft, essentially, like you're in this agent war, which is Microsoft wants to do it, ServiceNow wants to do it, SAP wants, or Salesforce wants to do it, and they're all at odds with each other. Their assumption is you've got all this data. Let's give you these agents to do these things. And now the question is, where do they live? And Dell's point of view is like, bring enough infrastructure, those can live at the edge. And I actually thought, from an edge standpoint, that was a pretty compelling argument.
Yeah, and I think Microsoft. Sorry to interrupt you, Caroline. I could see you're talking.
No.
I think Microsoft would say that they're trying to also build the glue to orchestrate it wherever your data is. So with MCP in Windows, and with agents that can run in the cloud and run locally, they could, if you need inference to run with data that's locally for privacy concerns, they can handle that. And then, of course, if your data's in the cloud, they can handle that too. But I'll pass it over to Carolina.
No, it was actually on the point that you just made about where everything is and the agent point of view. I thought it was interesting that now Microsoft starting to think about connecting agents because developers need to take advantage of data that they might not own. And so the agent, that is all great from a technology perspective, but nobody has started to think about the business implication of that. So, I have an agent for my app that is going to go and take advantage of whatever it is that then you have. Well, who owns the data? Do I need to pay something to you in order for my agent to communicate with your agent? Right. How is that going to all work? Who is going to be, we're talking about orchestrations of agents from a technology perspective, but we're not talking about orchestration from a business perspective yet. And I think that until that is clear, we're going to end up with a whole bunch of walled garden approach, because people are going to be concerned about the level of access that they're going to be granting for things to happen. And I don't know who, because right now, Microsoft made it quite clear that that's not their job, right? They're just going to make it happen, and then you're going to go figure it out. So whose job is it?
Yeah. Well, and I think this just adds it adds the dynamic of, again, right? Google is in an interesting position in that they are the only hyperscaler who owns their own foundational model, but it's unlikely that a bunch of third-party enterprises are going to use that foundational model, despite
That's
that
interesting.
Google wants, right? And Max and I were talking about this the other day. But Amazon and Microsoft don't invest in and partner with those with foundational models, but but they're the ones that are running most of the APIs, right, from a commercial standpoint. So it's a weird, again, back to who do you monetize? How does infrastructure get, pointed out? But yeah, it's a weird dynamic.
So what Google did with that at Cloud Next was they actually will now let you, and they partnered with NVIDIA to do this. If you own the GGX systems, you can now put the Gemini models, their foundational models, on NVIDIA cards to run on the edge no matter where you are. So they're sort of getting more into this cloud edge conversation too, where you can prototype on the cloud and then bring it locally with the same models you had access to,
Right.
either way.
Right. And I think you guys pointed out, right, Azure sort of is like, you pointed out building that bridge. Again, I don't know how Azure says take some models. Obviously, I don't think OpenAI is at this point come out and like given us an example of a full on take our model, put it at the edge and run your data. But it's this weird, right, dynamic because monetization happens in the cloud. It's a little less clear how that monetization happens at the edge when you can't charge for tokens. What are you charging for, right? So you're exactly right. I think this business model conversation remains so fuzzy but super interesting because again, everybody's roadmap is based on their business model assumptions, and we're not really sure, right, in this schism how these things get monetized, especially when you talk about, right, this idea at the edge. So it's a fascinating dynamic.
But I think even business models, and Google is the perfect example. If you're thinking about advertising, they know that their business model is going to be changed by AI dramatically. And so on one end, they're here empowering everybody to use AI. On the other end, they need to think about how they're going to start thinking differently about monetizing. And I do think I was talking to a couple of reporters like, well, I don't think is okay, you're gonna search in a different way. And so your advertising revenue is going to decline and there's nothing to make up for it. There will be, because at the end of the day, Google still has a ton of data that they can monetize from. But also, from an AI perspective, they can actually help advertisers with AI. So there are new revenue streams that they didn't have before that will make up for some of it. And maybe even end up earning them more money, but there's no question that the business model is changing.
Well, and I thought it was interesting that Max and I were sitting there at Google, and I can't remember if who pointed it out to us, but it happened in real time that even after they announced the kind of Gen AI search queries, their stock dropped like 4% and ended up being like 7% down. And you'd have thought about this, that the answer, like they're trying to answer Wall Street's question of like, well, how are you gonna solve this? So then they solved it, but then it became unclear how you're gonna monetize this. Like in a Gen AI search, it's a little bit weird to start throwing out sponsored, responses because that may not be what you feel is unbiased, right? In a search.
Yeah, but it's even now is like that, right? Because it is, I don't know if manipulated is the right word, but it is influenced by SEO. So as long as you put a disclaimer, why not? Right?
You
If
can.
you
I just
put,
think those. My question is: are those like when a consumer sees that? Are they like, oh, I don't want to be like, I don't believe this. I don't trust it as much because it's sponsored versus an organic. Because right now, my point is, Gen AI feels organic. Again, it's using data that may not be, but the perception of the customer is this is relatively organic, right? You start making it feel less organic, does that hurt the experience? And I don't know the answer. I just think that's an interesting question. Google's stock rebounded. Everybody was like, they're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Yada yada yada. But I just thought it was interesting that the initial thing was like, cool, but I'm still worried that you don't figure out how to monetize this like you
yeah.
were just basic, blue 10 blue searches.
I thought that was kind of why they started getting into shopping as well, because when you get into advertising and shopping, you actually have a conversion on a product purchase. That's more revenue to Google. They're going to get a 10% commission on the total or whatever they have with their advertisers on it. And that, if you're getting into now more personalized shopping where it knows what you like, what you've ordered, and can
Exactly.
recommend better things for you, and then let you try it on to increase that conversion rate, that becomes a lot more valuable as an advertising business and business model, close to what Amazon has, than any of the searches.
Yeah.
So I'll lob this out as a question. This is sort of more specific to Google, but may apply to others as well. But I feel like Gen AI interactions actually lead to more search queries than a one shot, than just using Google search and kind of doing a show me whatever. I feel like when I'm chatting with something, so, and I say this to say, again, to Carolina's point, assuming that they figure out how to do this cleanly, the number of places you can inject something to monetize, I think, goes up drastically versus just a one-shot Google search query.
I agree. I think that the interactions with AI are more like a 4-year-old asking why to the parents, right? Like you ask the initial question and then you get into this rabbit hole of wanting to know more or adding more to, the span that and that brings more opportunity to showcase either, data or brands or whatever the case might be versus a generic search.
Yeah.
And when you look at the way Google does AI mode now, you see you enter in anything and it searches 10 different queries and gives you 120 different websites. There's a lot more places to inject information than just a normal search where you're going to get more and see more.
I just think if Google's North Star is to provide you the best, most helpful experience ever, they will earn the right to continue chatting with you, to continue helping you, and to continue to potentially put products or advertisements or whatever in front of you. I mean, what was their original button? I'm feeling lucky. Like they were trying to get you like the answer that you wanted, right? And there's friction with lots of links and you have to click and everything. You're gonna get tired. But to your point, Ben, if you can ask a question, get the answer you want, then rapidly you can ask another question and just keep going. So I'm very bullish on that they will have the opportunity to win and figure out how to monetize it, as long as like the user experience is the priority.
Yeah. Okay. To the last topic point that I've talked with you all separately about and now individually, Ben's grand thesis on smart glasses. So, which is relevant because OpenAI is buying Johnny Ive's startup that is very clearly now signaled that they have every intent to be in the hardware business and make a AI wearable of some kind. This space is going to accelerate very, very quickly. And this, again, to Austin's point about just being helpful, like this has been Google's stated mission, right? We want to be the most helpful service out there. And we've got the vast, wide swath of world's data at our fingertips to be as helpful to you as possible. So my proposition for everyone to hear, which again you've all heard individually, is we don't need a display in our AR glasses anytime soon to make these things extremely useful. And the fundamental experience is multimodal. So I keep saying this, like if anybody's used ChatGPT with video or Gemini plus Live plus video, you just pull your camera out from your phone, show it what you're seeing, and just start having a conversation. And it knows your context, it'll make observations, and you just chat with the internet in a whole new way, honestly, which is really like my experience with this. Is like, I was telling Austin this yesterday, like I feel like it's like discovering the internet for the first time. So just put that on my face and I will find it exceptionally useful. So that's the grand thesis. And then the second part to this is like, I've been struggling to find use cases where a visual display adds like a significant amount of value. I can see it adding some utility, but I'm saying like, I don't see it adding 50% more utility in some of these scenarios. So there's there's my grand thesis. So everybody could hear it because I've literally been tweeting about it all week. I'm like, you don't need a display. You don't need a display. You don't need a display. And I think people might think I'm crazy. So that's my thesis lobbed out for the group to discuss. So there you go.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to make your first point, which is that to get more out of an AI model, ChatGPT, whatever, we need more than text. We need to see the world around you. We need a camera. So that's your first point. And you can succinctly say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Instead of typing or talking with voice, if we're just constantly giving it as much data as possible in the input, then it can do more for you. Carolina?
No, I think it's more than that. I mean, there's no question that having context is critical to a very personal experience. But having tried the glasses demo, and I wrote about it when I did with Google, it just blew me away how having something in your ear and who was able to see what was around you and recall as well, because it's not just about what is life, but it's being able to go back 10 minutes to what you've seen, and the model remembering that. We obviously have to have a whole separate conversation about privacy and what as a user I'm going to be willing and and comfortable sharing. But I think the value alone that brings is going to get people to say, yeah, look, I don't care, look at everything that I'm looking at. And right now you can do it with taking a picture or pointing the phone, but there's friction there, because it's like I've been doing it all week with Perplexity, taking a picture of a question and uploading the questions and then asking the question, and it's just not the same. So I do think that that's important. As far as the screen on the actual glasses, I tend to agree with you that you don't necessarily need it all the time, but there are some moments where it might be useful. The example that I gave you, Ben, when we were chatting about this, was when I was getting a live translation as I was talking to somebody, because having the voice in the ear would just make you listen to the person less. And so being able to, us having a conversation and me just reading, where I was missing maybe a word or two, it was useful. The other thing I would say as well, if we all agree that you don't necessarily need a screen, that opens up where you can put a camera as well. So, there's this rumor about Apple wanting to put cameras on AirPods. Does it make a difference to you if your cameras are on the glasses or they're here? You're still capturing what is around you, and then you have the camera and the the voice coming from the same source. And I think that at the end of the day, my opinion is going to be about options. Not everybody is going to be able to wear glasses or wants to wear glasses. And so having different options, Max has the pendant that records conversation. Like if you take and you put a camera on that, the same as Humane was trying to do. Like, there are other opportunities that if you're not using it to take a picture or a video, then it doesn't necessarily have to be on your eyes.
Yeah. And I'm not totally sold on AR glasses. I don't wear glasses. Every time I've tried Meta Ray-Bans, they last for like a week before I put them down. I just don't use them again. And like even in the AI conversations that I had with Gemini Live and ChatGPT voice, I don't find much utility out of that. It's cool, but I don't ever find myself going out of my way to use these. And even if it's convenient to use, I don't really use it. So I kind of like how Google's trying to build the platform for others to build it. Samsung has glasses coming now. At some point, they announced that at I/O. Xreal has the dev ones. But I like it being on my phone, where I can turn on the camera if I want it. It still feels like a natural way to do it. And then the AI can see my phone screen, which can be a portal to the world or to what I'm doing. And it gives you a little bit more options. Like maybe if you're walking down New York and you want directions, you're wearing a smartwatch already. You get the directions here. That works as the display. AirPods in, you can listen to it, and then your phone has everything else. So I think there's other ways to do it than the holy grail of smart glasses, which I don't think you need a screen for it. Obviously, there's ways around that. But I don't know if glasses will work like for everyone. I know 80% of the US wears glasses, but I don't know if that like user experience is going to be something people actually, uh, you know, hold on to compared to just adding things to your phone.
I think he just called us old because this might be actually a generational difference.
Well, and I think the reason that this got me thinking, right, and Max is right. Like everybody will take a different approach. I think we're not what everybody agrees with universally is just this agent that's kind of persistently and ambiently available to you has value. The question then is how do you interact with that information? And I think that like the light bulb moment I had was, and we've all done a vast number of AR-ish mixed reality demos, and every single one of those generally is not multimodal or voice agent based interface. It is, here's a display and you control with your hands, like you're interacting with it. It's like, of somewhat of a duplication of the interaction experience of phones and computers. Once you take that off the table and say, well, what if I reimagined this demo and this thing just could see everything I saw and talk to me and I could interact with it and talk to it? I don't need my hands. It doesn't need to see my hands. I don't need to learn all these pinch and zoom, gestures anymore. I just feel like the whole world's vision was built up with not that experience in mind of just audibly seeing. And so reimagining it with that, to me, eliminates a lot of the challenge of doing this and puts a ton of value in something that could be made by the end of this year, probably will be, and by the end of next year in an affordable way, right? In whatever way it manifests itself, to Max's point, whether that's glasses or a pin or, out of my ear pods, whatever, right? Just there's something there. And I like just flipping this on the head to say, what if I didn't have a display and I didn't have to use my hands awkwardly when I'm in a grocery store and it just sees and talks to me, it's like,
even better, everyone's talking to themselves in the grocery store.
Yeah. Yes. It's going to be weird in any way I think we sliced it.
Totally. Yeah. But I mean, I do think you have a good point, which is we can iterate our way there. We don't have to wait for the display technology to be amazing. There's a ton of value to be unlocked without the displays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
But to Carolina's point, yeah, there you go. There's like live captioning. Hey, that could be useful for some people where they would want the display. So you can definitely see like a portfolio of devices in the future, but we don't need to wait for that.
Right. Oh, and the other last point I'll make on this is like, well, if it has a camera and it can see things, maybe it adds value when I'm looking at a screen. Maybe it sees my computer screen or it sees my phone screen and similarly has additional ways to capture that information and help me speed things up in my workflows or whatever, right? I just think we haven't fully thought through something sees what I see in real time.
How often are you in a meeting and there's another meeting coming up, but you don't you're engrossed in the conversation or whatever and you forget about it? So to your point about the agent looking at your screen and just saying, hey, your next meeting is coming up, in a more personal and better way than not the reminder that comes up, but you ignore all the time because you have so many. But maybe it's just a me problem. But yeah.
No, Ben, you have a meeting. You should put a shirt on.
Yes, that would be useful. That is the perfect use case. I was like,
you're not prepared.
Maybe you're not wearing a shirt.
Did you know your hair is a mess? You're supposed to have a meeting in 2 minutes. I suggest combing your hair. All right, that's all we got for you this episode of Bit by Bit. Thanks for watching, everybody. We will talk to you next time.